Hello again. This is your dad, Michael Sekaquaptewa. I am at the Chicago Public Library, the Harold Washington Public Library. And my goodness, this is one marvelous library. You won't hear as many noises as we did when we were in the park because I'm in a private study room. You'll also hear some music later on that I made because at this library, on the 8th floor, they have practice rooms, and in every practice room, there is a piano. So I'll play for some piano for you guys later. But tonight I want to read you guys Perseus and the Gorgon head, which will be a lot of fun. So here we go. Perseus was the son of the great god Zeus, also known as Jupiter in Roman culture, and his mother was Danae. The father of Danae had consulted an oracle at his birth and was alarmed to learn that the infant would one day be the cause of his death. So he had Danae and her child shut up in a chest and set adrift on the sea, thinking that they might thus be drowned. But after drifting for many days, the chest finally floated to the shores of Seriphus, where it was found by a fisherman. He brought the mother and child to Polydectes, the king of the country, who treated them kindly, offering them the hospitality of his own home. When Perseus had grown to manhood, Polydectes called to him and asked if he would be brave enough to try and rid the country of the terrible monster Medusa, who was laying waste to the kingdom. She was one of the Gorgons, monstrous females having huge tusks instead of teeth, claws made of brass on their heads instead of hair, hundreds of live, twisting, hissing snakes. Medusa had once been a beautiful maiden whose hair was her chief glory, but she had dared to compete in beauty with the goddesses. So her beautiful ringlets had then become changed into hissing serpents, and she herself into a cruel monster, so horrible to behold that no living thing could gaze at her frightful head without being turned at once into stone. All around the cave where she dwelt could be seen the petrified figures of people who happened to catch a glimpse of her and had been turned to stone on the spot. Perseus consented to try to conquer the Gorgon, but first, being the son of Zeus, he sought the help of the gods. Athena, also known as Minerva, remember her, she was in the last story, was kind to Perseus and lent him her bright shield to protect him from the monster. Hermes, also known as Mercury, lent him his winged shoes and told him to fly over Medusa while she slept and to remember that he must never look directly at the snaky head. Holding up his shield like a mirror and guided only by the image as it was reflected in the bright surface, Perseus succeeded in cutting off the head of Medusa. Bearing the Gorgon's head with him, Perseus continued on his flight until he arrived at the country of the Ethiopians, of which Cephas was the king. His queen, Cassiopeia, had been so proud of her beauty that she dared to compare herself to the sea nymphs. This made them angry, that they sent a horrible sea monster to ravage the coast. It roamed up and down the shore, destroying ships and killing everyone in its path. King Cephas was in despair, and when he consulted an oracle, he was told that the only thing that could save the country was to allow his daughter Andromeda to be sacrificed to the sea monster. So the poor girl was chained to a rock and left for the monster to devour. As Perseus looked down from the aerial height, he beheld the beautiful maiden helpless on the rock, awaiting the moment of her death. She was so pale and motionless that if it had not been for her flowing tears and her hair that moved in the breeze, he would have taken her for a marble statue. He was so startled at the sight that he forgot to move his wings and almost tumbled into the water. Recovering his balance and hovering over her, he said, O maiden, undeserving of these chains, tell me, I beseech you, your name and the name of your country, and why you are thus bound. At first she was silent from modesty, but when he gently repeated his question, she grew less afraid, and told him her name and that of her country, and how her mother's pride had brought a punishment to the land. Before she had done speaking, a sound was heard in the water, and there came the sea monster with his head raised above the surface, and his broad breast parting the waves. Andromeda shrieked, and her father and mother, who had been standing on the shore in utter misery, rushed up to the rock and stood by, helpless and sobbing for the poor victim. Then Perseus said, There will be a time enough for tears. This hour is all we have for a rescue. My rank as the son of Zeus and my renown as the slayer of the Gorgon might make me acceptable as a suitor. But I will try to win her by the services I now hope to render, if the gods will favor me. If I succeed in rescuing her, I demand as a reward that she be my bride. The parents swiftly gave their consent. How could they hesitate? And promised a royal dowry as well. A dowry is when the parents give gifts and money to the husband when their daughter is married to them. Now when the monster was within a stone's throw of the maiden, Perseus, with a sudden bound, soared up into the air, as an eagle in lofty flight sees a serpent basking in the sun, and pounces upon him, seizing him up by the neck to prevent him from turning his head around and using his fangs. So did the brave youth dart up and down and back of the monster. He plunged his sword into his shoulder. Irritated by the wound, the monster raised himself in the air, then dived back into the water. Then, like a wild boar surrounded by a pack of barking dogs, he turned swiftly from side to side, while Perseus escaped his attacks by means of his wings. Whenever he could strike, Perseus plunged his sword, wounding now between the scales, now on the flank. From his nostrils the brute spouted water mixed with blood. Soon the wings of the hero were wet with blood, so that he dared no longer to trust them to hold him up. Aligning on the rock which rose above the waves, he caught the monster as it floated near and gave him the final death blow. The people who had gathered on the shore meanwhile let out a great shout of rejoicing, so that the hills re-echoed the sound. The parents, overcome with joy, embraced their future son-in-law, calling him the deliverer and the savior of their country. Andromeda descended from the rock and was embraced by Perseus. They all went to the palace, where a great wedding feast was spread for them, and all was joy and festivity. But suddenly a loud warlike noise was heard, and Phineus, who had been betrothed to Andromeda, that means he was supposed to marry her, burst into the room with a large band of his followers and demanded the maiden as his own. It was in vain that the king Cephas reminded him, You should have had claimed her when she lay bound on the rock, the monster's victim. The sentence of the gods dooming her to such a fate dissolved the engagement, as death itself would have done. Phineus made no reply, but he hurled his javelin at Perseus. That's like a spear. It missed his mark, however, and fell harmless. Perseus would have thrown his in return, but his cowardly assailant ran and took shelter behind the altar. This act was a signal to his band to attack the guests. They defended themselves, and soon a general conflict began. Perseus and his friend kept up the unequal contest for some time, but the numbers of their assailants were too great for them, and defeat seemed inevitable. Then a sudden thought struck Perseus. I will make my enemy defend me. He called out in a loud voice, If I have any friends here, let them turn away their eyes. And he held up the Gorgon's head. Seek not to frighten us with your juggling, said one of the band of Cephas. And then he raised his javelin to throw it. Immediately he turned to stone, and that very attitude. Another was about to plunge his sword into the fallen body of Perseus's friend, when his arm stiffened so that he could neither thrust forward or withdraw. All around Phineus, men stood petrified, with their mouths open in the midst of challenge, but no sound came forth. Phineus beheld the dreadful result of his unjust demands, and knew that he must pay for it. He called aloud to his friends, but got no answer. He touched them and found them stone. Falling to his knees, he stretched out his hands to Perseus, begging for mercy. Phineus took special care to turn his head away from the sight of Medusa. "Take all," he cried, "but spare me my life." "You coward," answered Perseus. "This much I will grant you. No weapon shall touch you. Instead, you shall be preserved in my house forever as a memorial of these events." So saying, he held the Gorgon's head to the side where Phineus was looking. And then, in very form in which he knelt, with his arms outstretched and face averted, Phineus became fixed immovably, a statue of stone forever. This story was based on The Age of Fable by Thomas Bulfinch. That's the same guy who did the last one. How about that? So I had a lot of fun reading this story to you guys, and I'll have another one very soon. And one of these days we'll have to come back together to this library. I think you guys would love it very much. There's a whole floor dedicated to children's books. And as I promised before, I'm going to leave this recording session with some music I recorded in the practice room here at the Harold Washington Public Library in Chicago, Illinois. And now it is time for resting. I hope Helen and Reed, you guys get the rest that you need so your bodies are strong and your minds are even stronger. I miss everybody in our family. I miss the children. I miss Diane. I miss Eric and Carmen. And I hope very soon that we'll be back together as one big happy family. Good night. And I love everybody. I miss you all very much.